Welcome to the Land Use Podcast, brought to you by the Alberta Land Institute. This is Episode 2, How to Grow and Protect Agricultural Land in Alberta. Your hosts this week are me, Evan Menzies, and our guest, Dr. Brent Swallow. Brent is a professor at the University of Alberta as a member of the Faculty of Agricultural, Life, and Environmental Sciences. He also was a co-PI on a recently released report through the Alberta Land Institute, which investigated the economic impact of agricultural land fragmentation and conversion across Alberta. Welcome to the podcast, Brent.
I'm happy to be here, Evan.
I'm wondering if we could start with you giving us a little bit of a background about what first got you interested in this topic and the economics of land use and how Albertans in general manage agricultural land here in Alberta.
I'm originally from a farm in Saskatchewan, so I'm interested in agriculture and studied agricultural economics. And before coming here in 2009 to Alberta, I was in Kenya, and we were working on the challenges of the water quality and quantity available to the residents of the city of Nairobi and how directly that was related to land use and agriculture in the headwaters area. So I'm very interested in those links between what farmers do and who is affected by those decisions. When I came here in 2009, it was an interesting time because the Alberta government had just passed the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, so kind of launching planning processes at the regional level. So I became very interested in, research that could be, use some of my skills, but also resonate with people here in Alberta.
On that topic, I'm wondering if you could give a quick summary of the Alberta Land Stewardship Act and the type of impacts that piece of legislation has when it comes to land use planning and how it might touch on agricultural land.
Yeah, so this Land Stewardship Act focuses on the possibility for planning of land use at regional levels as defined by major watersheds of the provinces. It identified a very quick process for coming up with regional land use plans. The process has been much slower, but perhaps more care given to the way it's developed. So far we have passed plans for the South Saskatchewan River Basin and the Athabasca. The challenge is that while it clarifies plans for what ought to be done at the regional level, we don't have a regional form of government here. So we really have devolved a lot of responsibilities to municipalities. So that's the next challenge then, is how municipalities can respond to sort of overall plans which are set out at the watershed level.
Okay, so also was passed in 2009. This project started, I think, around 2014. That's right. So what? From the time ALSA was passed, can you talk a little bit about the development of this project and a little bit more about how it got started and how it got underway? Yeah,
so I think that that same process that led to ALSA also reflects greater concern about a broader public and even the formation of the Alberta Land Institute. And so the Alberta Land Institute identified the economics of conversion and fragmentation of agricultural land to be one of their priorities. And there was a competitive process in the university, and a team of us from resource economics and environmental sociology and earth and atmospheric sciences came together then to work with professors and graduate students on a kind of suite of related projects that would look at what's going on with land use, what are the patterns, what's the history, what have been the drivers of land use change, and then what are some of the consequences of that.
So on that note too, then can you give us a bit of an idea of how we define agricultural land here in Alberta, what the state of it is, and how it looks across the province as far as regions goes? Sort of what are the types of different agriculture that the different regions of the province, I guess, specialize in?
Right. Yeah, sort of a rough and ready way of thinking about land in Alberta is between the green zone, which is primarily publicly crown land, which is publicly managed by the province, and often forest is one of the land uses there, and the white zone, which is the agricultural zone, which is where most of the land is privately owned, with that white zone stretching from the Peace area in northwest part of the province, down to the southern parts of the provinces. In much of the southern part of the province, as you know, agriculture is somewhat limited by rainfall, so irrigation plays a big role in those areas. And in the center part of the province, we have more plentiful rainfall and also better quality soils. So you have while we have large production out of the irrigated areas, those are limited in extent, and the main areas, agricultural area other than irrigation area, kind of stretches from up northward from there to Edmonton, and then the patch in the Peace area. We distinguish land by its land use suitability and sort of the number of constraints on agriculture that the land imposes and the weather imposes. And two of the best qualities of land then tend to be located in the areas between Edmonton and Calgary, in the corridor area, and then around Edmonton.
So on that note too, then, a lot of what the report talks about is that conversion and fragmentation of land in that QE2 corridor and around Edmonton. I'm wondering if you could kind of sort of break down the numbers of what that's looking like as far as agricultural land either being lost or converted in development.
Yeah. So we took a look at land use change at the province level in the corridor areas, you said, from Edmonton to Calgary along the Queen Elizabeth II Highway, and then in the capital region in more detail around Edmonton. And we find that where that is the same area that we have the highest density of population in Alberta, we have the greatest land use change in Alberta, and we have the greatest percentages of the highest quality agricultural area. So we've got a coincidence of factors in that corridor area. We note pretty high change. So between 2000 and 2012, our numbers are suggesting that there was a net change of about 625 square kilometers of land from agricultural uses into what we call developed uses, which are either residential or industrial, and that about half of that or so was on the best quality land, and half or so was on somewhat lower quality of land.
So one of the things when it comes to this discussion that I think is interesting is there are obviously a lot of people in and around Alberta who are very invested in the state of agricultural land. But I'm wondering if you could kind of break down for, say, the average person living in the city who hasn't spent much time dwelling on where the food comes from, dwelling on the importance of agricultural land, about why we should be concerned about the fragmentation and conversion of this high quality soil around Alberta. I mean, for a lot of folks, they just see the food pop up in the grocery store, and that takes care of their needs. So I'm wondering if you could sort of break down about the economic impact and sort of maybe cultural impact's not the right word, but the types of the impact of losing that agricultural land, that rural aesthetic maybe too, and some of that history of how that land is traditionally operated.
Yeah, there's it's the effects seem to ripple out, and the kind of more we look at them, the more we see this kind of rippling of effects. So when land changes use from agriculture to developed or industrial, it changes forever. And so we've got basically an irreversible type of change. So whenever we're contemplating those changes, it's important to keep in mind that those are forever type changes. So that's one thing, sort of the irreversibility of those decisions. The other, what we see, and you mentioned for the first time, fragmentation. And so there's these two processes that we studied. One is, change of land use from agriculture to developed uses. Another one, and that's primarily kind of a push from the cities and a greater footprint of the cities into the countryside. The other thing happening also in the countryside is the development of rural residential or acreages as preferred places to live.
Right.
So people who want to live out in the countryside and who are given they're allowed to do that by the municipal governments who allow redesignation of land into residential are part of sort of an overall fragmentation of our landscape. And our landscape is fragmenting for other reasons, including utility corridors and other things, but it's certainly fragmenting in these desirable areas, especially that area in the corridor, due to sort of this mushrooming of rural residential. And one of the things we found is rural residential and that fragmentation, not only is it a concern in its own right, but it's also a concern because it seems to be a precursor for conversion of land into developed uses. So these two processes, the ever expanding footprint of the cities and then the fragmentation due to development of rural residential, cause a sort of a distinct change in the sort of the property markets. And so we get land markets which are driven more and more by the prospect of changing land use, either around the cities, that conversion, or in the countryside, the fragmentation. So less and less of land value is actually made up by its agricultural potential. Right. So that causes a few changes, and one of them is we run the risk of ever increasing distinction between who owns the land and what they own it for, and who's actually farming the land. And that's, I think, is something that we're concerned about. We know that we're also concerned about both the production of around the cities. That land, some of that land is used for things like market gardens and irrigated vegetables and vegetable production into the farmers markets. And in the wider context, the overall health of the agricultural sector. That's the economic story. We also know that people desire a landscape which has open space, and so when we have conversion and fragmentation, we lose some of that open space, and we also lose some of the environmental services that open space provides. And we certainly are. I think many people are aware of the importance of rolling lands that has undulation and changes in topography to be important for things like water quantity and water quality. So we're seeing people express concern about those environmental services which are also lost as a result of conversion.
So that kind of gives us a good groundwork here to jump into public policy and the type of options that different levels of government might have as far as addressing the problems of fragmentation and conversion and everything and the problems that come with that. So I'm wondering if you could kind of give us a bit of, we've talked about ELSA, but maybe give us a bit of a framework of where we're at as far as the legislative tools that both municipal governments and the provincial government have to address this issue.
Yeah, The Alberta Land Stewardship Act also identified a couple tools, which are a few which are sort of about zoning for environmental purposes, and environmental easements, which are more market-based instruments to help municipalities that would designate certain areas. Those have not been very popular or widely used. They are expensive to put into place, relatively expensive to maintain. They would require some type of compensation for landowners, and to figure out the base for compensation is a big challenge. And that's sort of where, as far as the also tools go, we think that really the tools which are currently available outside of ALSA, which are just part of the policy choices and the policy levers that municipal governments have, that those are really actually more important. And so the biggest decision that a municipality can make, I think, to conserving farmland is to not allow its conversion, not allow its conversion, or not allow its the hiving off of small plots for rural residential. So that's a decision that's clearly already available to rural municipalities, and one of the key tools available to urban municipalities is actually the density requirements that they impose on developers. So we think that the development process has sort of let developers off the hook a bit, both in terms of the costs that they've been bearing, as well as allowing kind of a low density housing approach to proceed. So I think that municipalities are starting to recognize that, and we're seeing some promising signs.
Now, one of the things, at least I've heard about, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that for some rural municipalities and counties, one of the challenges that arises from a public policy perspective is that if one municipality or county basically says, no, we're not going to pursue this land for development, a competing municipality close by will say, okay, great, we will try. We're going to essentially compete for the same land area, and we'll let developers come in. So they're basically competing, I guess, in one sense, for development dollars and the revenues that would come with it. So I'm wondering, and obviously, and that's kind of a hindrance to cooperation when it comes to the big picture. I'm wondering if you can just maybe touch on that and wonder and maybe comment if there are any legislative tools or other initiatives that can be used to sort of limit that from happening.
Yeah, good point. So we've been, for the last 2 years or so, been interviewing policy folks involved in policy processes, both the planners and councillors and reeves and mayors, about the challenges that they face. And seems to be lots of anecdotal evidence of particular cases where municipalities are essentially sitting next to that within the municipality there are tensions between the development and conservation, and then between neighboring municipalities. And so if there's a debate of whether you should municipalities should put in place kind of more rigorous controls on land use, and you say, well, why should we, when the neighbors are likely to do the opposite? The neighbors are more likely to be pro-development. The neighbors are more likely to get that tax revenue, and we're going to have to bear the costs. Then you've got a recipe for kind of a race to the bottom, right? For each municipality to kind of lower its standards relative to each other. Avoiding a race to the bottom is, and our research shows that anecdotal evidence actually, we can actually see evidence of it. So we certainly see that from our analysis of land use changes, that what happens in one municipality in terms of the pace of land use change spills over to its neighbors. There's a clear spillover effect of that of land use change. So the answer, both from the research and from the discussions, is to have greater regional collaboration in plans and the policies that you need to put in place and the regulations you need to put in place to kind of implement your policies. And the Municipal Government Act of 2016, some of the changes that requires municipalities to do land use plans which conserve prime farmland, and it requires them to collaborate with their neighboring municipalities. So those two things together are two of the right instruments we feel for avoiding some of that kind of race for the tax dollar that you're indicating.
Now, one other question I had related to public policy is Alberta is obviously not the only jurisdiction who sort of struggles with how to handle how we designate agricultural land and how we handle that tension between development and growth and preserving land. Are there any examples from other jurisdictions that you think might be interesting or worth considering that you've come by?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we've been looking at the experiences of different U.S. states and different U.S. cities, as well as what's going on in Canada. The big experiments in farmland conservation, the big tests of that are in the lower mainland in British Columbia and the island, as well as around the horseshoe around Toronto. So those are provincial level policy initiatives where really they were put in place quite quickly, quite clearly, and really so who bore the cost of that conservation is really existing landowners, right? So existing landowners may have had a sense of what their land is worth when it's developed, and then you make a change, say essentially stop development. Existing landowners are sort of left holding the bag. So that teaches us in a way. And then if you look at conservation easements as a widely used tool in the United States, so whoever buys the conservation easement is bearing the cost. We've got other things like transferable development credits, which are designed so that the new developers would bear the cost. So I guess that's what we see. The big difference between these instruments is who bears the cost. Right. And we probably need some type of hybrid model here, because I don't think that we're politically ready for a movement that would be seen as clearly anti-rural, to have anti-property rights, to have current landowners bear all the cost. Right. So for me, I think the biggest opportunity in Alberta is to kind of take the heat out of the land market. If we can take the heat out by reducing the prospect of a sprawling and fragmented approach to development, and more vertical development and more dense development, to take the heat off, to take some of the speculation value out, I think that would be one big step forward for Alberta.
Great. Now, one of the other parts of the report that you guys did was you did a survey of residents in the Edmonton and Edmonton surrounding area regarding their perception and values of agricultural land, and if they would make a contribution or to preserving agricultural land. I'm wondering if you can sort of give us a rundown of those survey results and what you think they mean as far as Albertans' attitudes towards agricultural land and possible development of further public policy on it.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that we wanted to do with this study we started back in 2014, because was to really assess sort of for residents, right, for people who are paying taxes, people who live in particular communities, how do they feel about conversion and fragmentation of ag land, and how big a concern is it? Because it existed in ALSA, was it really a thing, in a sense, for a broader group of people? We interviewed 320 people who reside in the capital regions, that's Edmonton plus the surrounding urban and rural municipalities, and asked them about whether they thought the pace of conversion, of development was too high or too low, what they thought agricultural land did for them, what were the services that they thought agricultural land provided, would they be willing to pay for kind of scenarios where money would be used to help conserve land. And we found that people were most concerned about land that were used for vegetable production, producing food for the local market primarily, and then the air pollution and water pollution mitigation values of land, and less so the use of land for producing food for the global market, so for, say, wheat and canola production. They were most interested in conserving land that was rolling grassland, which is now used primarily for cattle grazing, and vegetable production land, and then somewhat less concerned about saving land as primarily used for crop production and hay land. We found that 80% of people were willing to pay something, so we started at $20 as kind of our bottom, as a one-time increase in their taxes. And then about 30% of people were willing to pay $300 as a one-time contribution. So we do see, the average person, somewhat concerned, and when we had focus groups with the public, we found that they were quite educated and knowledgeable and quite observant of the changes and sort of the sprawl of the city. And we found, 20% of people who are sort of hardcore developers and say that's a good sign, right? Development is almost by definition good because it means more jobs and more tax revenue and more services as a result of that. The majority of people are, that 80% saying it's a problem, it's a challenge we need to take account of, and then maybe another 20% or to 30% of people who are pretty hardcore, need to develop, need to conserve as part of the population.
Right. So, from those results, what surprised you the most, or were there any of those findings that surprised you the most, or did they kind of confirm what your perceptions were beforehand about what the general public thought on the issues?
Yeah, I think I have a farm background, so I like many of the farmers I've chatted to have this kind of affinity to wide open fields, right? And that those large areas of wheat and canola land on the prime agricultural land, that was somewhat less of a concern, of sort of priority for conservation for these urban residents than vegetable land and the rolling grassland. And I think it matches with their responses to the questions about why do you want to conserve land? Because of producing food for the local market and because of its environmental services. And if you think about what kind of land does that best, then you get, the areas of northeast Edmonton that are kind of special, have special value for market gardens and seed potato production, and you get the kind of rolling grassland, which is, located primarily to the southeast of the city. So I guess that was a surprise that it was that the people were as knowledgeable as they were. I think that also surprised us.
Yeah. Well, I guess people spend a lot more time thinking about their food and where it comes from than they might have used to. One last question for this podcast. You mentioned earlier, signs of improvement or signs of encouragement when it comes to the public policy discussions and evolution of how we're approaching agricultural land in the province. I'm wondering if you could just maybe touch on a couple examples that you're encouraged by or that come front to mind.
Yeah. So we're right now. It seems that that capital region, which really has had the worst sprawl problems in the past, right, starting from the 1980s up until at least 2013 or so, certainly had the worst problems, and maybe that's why we see this capital region now also showing the most signs of actually moving forward with conserving land, getting that into the agenda, and doing things in some type of coordinated way. So that's promising. I see municipalities that I've talked to who are, really, really concerned about losing agricultural land. So Wheatland County to the east of Calgary is one of those. We also see communities where they're still at loggerheads. So all of those things exist. I think hopefully the requirement for joint planning, even if people are not start into those processes with less, with more transient views, perhaps just the need for joint planning, sparks some change in position.
Well, thank you so much, Brent, for joining us today, and thank you, everyone, for listening in. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our podcast, and you can also find us on SoundCloud. And if you can, make sure to give us a rating. It helps us out quite a bit. And if you're not already, make sure that you follow us on social media. It's at AB Land Institute on Twitter and Instagram, and you can also find us on Alberta Land Institute over at Facebook. Thank you so much for listening in, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.